Chapter 10. What is mutiny? I simply don't believe it. Graham Ellis leaned forward in his chair in the dining hall at Yale. I've seen the man they call a murderer, I tell you. I've seen him talk with Cinque as much as you can talk with somebody who doesn't speak your language. There's something wrong with the story those Spaniards tell. The young tutor sat at the head of one of the dining tables. The clatter of dishes and scraping of benches at other tables in the dining hall forced him to raise his voice. The evening meal was over, and most of the scholars and their tutors were leaving. But the boys at Graham Ellis's table were deep in talk about the prisoners who had been brought to New Haven that day. They did not stir. A rare sight it had been in the forenoon to see 40 savages clanking their chains across the green to the prison house. One of the mutineers, the one charged with the murder of the captain of the Amistad, had chains on both arms and legs. A fat boy sitting at the tutor's right laughed. He said, "I reckon there's no mistake, sir. The Spaniards tell a pretty straightforward story of mutiny and murder. It seems they were transporting their slaves from one end of Cuba to another, and the blacks mutinied and killed the captain and crew and seized the ship. They would have gotten away with it if the owners, name of Ruiz and Montes, very pleasant fellows, hadn't played a smart trick. It seems the Africans sailed east in the daytime, and the Spaniards changed the course of the ship every night. For 2 months, they've been zigzagging out in the ocean." Another boy, Jill Johnson, spoke up in a southern drawl. "I hear Gedney, commander of the rescue ship, has put in for salvage money. I wish I were in his shoes. What with rescuing the ship and the shipload of slaves and other property, he'll collect a neat reward." A laugh went around the table. Jill Johnson spent his allowance the first week of every month and then borrowed from his friends until the next money arrived from Virginia. Graham Ellis didn't join in the laughter. He was still trying to make sense of the events he had witnessed on the beach at Culloden Point. The Africans had about completed their bargain with Pelatiah Fulham and Captain Green. They had arranged to bring the Amistad around the point, to the ocean side of Long Island. There, the masts would be mended, new sails provided, and the ship stocked with food and water. In 3 days, Green had promised the ship would be ready to continue its voyage. He and Fulham would go as navigators at the end of the voyage. The money and the ship would be theirs. Everything had been peaceful and friendly until suddenly the beach was overrun with Navy men. The Negroes had been clubbed and dragged into the lifeboat of the cutter. The commander, Gedney, had thrown the money box in the bottom of the boat and pushed off, leaving Ellis and his friends speechless with surprise. "There's one lot of money Gedney won't collect," Graham said, pushing his plate away and planting his elbows on the dining table. "When the sailors hauled the captives back to their ship, I followed in a painter. I left Green and Fulham on the beach, thanking their lucky stars they'd been warned off from murderers. But I couldn't make sense of what was happening. Couldn't then, and can't now." "What about the money?" Jill asked. Graham smiled faintly. "When they got to deep water at the end of Culloden Point, Cinque rose up and lifted the coin chest in his chained arms. Before the sailors could stop him, he flung the thing overboard. The money that was going to buy their way home is at the bottom of the ocean." Enoch Hopkins, at the end of the long table, came around to stand in back of Graham Ellis's chair. Enoch was a farm boy whose home was not far from New Haven. As a rule, he was very quiet, good in his studies, but not much of a mixer with the other scholars. His face was flushed now, and he spoke eagerly. "Mr. Ellis, maybe they're not lawfully slaves at all. They can't be if they're fresh out of Africa. Spain's got a treaty with England that says slaves can't be imported anymore." The tutor nodded gratefully. "That's what I'm trying to say," he answered. My guess is that those people over in the prison house are natives of Africa who were kidnapped from their homes. Heaven knows how. They thought they had found a way to return. They're mutineers and murderers, Jill Johnson murmured under his breath. If Enoch or Graham Ellis heard, they did not bother to answer. How can the truth be discovered? Enoch asked. How can the Africans even tell their side of the story? They speak a language like nothing I ever heard, Graham responded. There's a boy no older than you, about as tall, but thin and bony. He kept repeating one word of English, just one word. Free. And there was an old man who had an open wound in his stomach. He tried to say something in what sounded like Arabic, only I don't know any Arabic. But the leader, Cinque, got along with sign language and drawing in the sand. Wanting to get food and water and somebody to pilot a ship, Enoch said slowly. Those are easy to explain. Enslavement isn't. Exactly, the tutor agreed. These Africans haven't even the knowledge of our laws. They're defenseless, tongueless. But you said one of them seemed to know Arabic, sir, Enoch urged. He pushed back a lock of hair that had fallen across his forehead. He was always doing that in class when he was interested in or excited by an idea. Gibbs! Old Gibbs knows Arabic. Professor Gibbs? Ellis smiled. Willard Gibbs wasn't old except in the eyes of this 16-year-old student. Professor Gibbs, Enoch explained, he teaches ancient languages. You're so taken with your rocks and earth, Mr. Ellis, you don't notice what other people are teaching. Gibbs is the same way. He doesn't think we ought to study anything but words. Sacred symbols of human thought, he calls them. Graham Ellis stood up abruptly. Excuses, gentlemen, he said and looked around at the empty table. He had been so deep in talk with the one boy who understood the problem that he hadn't noticed the others when they quietly left the table. Now he took Enoch by the elbow and started without ceremony for the door. Are we going to see Gibbs now? Right off? Enoch asked, matching his strides to the tutor's. We are, Graham Ellis said. There's no time to lose with the Spaniards clamoring for their property and Gedney for his salvage money. The Negroes will be on their way back to Cuba before anybody finds out whether they're legally slaves or free men. Early next morning, Callie stood at the barred window of the New Haven prison. Behind him, huddled in hopeless attitudes, were about half of the Amistad captives. Their chains had been removed. They were free to wander around the cell, but they hardly stirred from the places where they had thrown themselves the night before. There were, in the prison house, 4 rooms that served as cells. Most of the prisoners had been crowded into 2 of the rooms. The girls had been placed alone in a 3rd room, and Cinque, still in chains, was in solitary confinement. His friends had seen him being marched off, heavily chained. They did not know whether he was still living. They had not been able to speak to him since they were parted in that first prison house on the seacoast. Callie stood at the window looking out on the green grass and the wind blowing through the trees. He was thinking that Cinque did not even know that Tua was dead. Callie did not shrink from naming Tua, the gentle one, in his thoughts. He would not mind if Tua's spirit should return and come asking. Tua had been good and wise, even if he had been mistaken in that word in the white man's language. That word, free. I will speak Tua's name, though he has died, the boy thought bitterly. But I will not speak that word, free, again. Callie was still staring out the window when Graham Ellis came across the green with 2 other white men. One was bearded and stoop-shouldered. The other seemed but a boy. Callie clenched his hands. He felt no friendship for the man from the beach. Meeting him had brought such hope, and then he had stood by while hope was taken away. There was a grating sound. The door to the cell opened, and the jailer brought the 3 inside. Callie watched without moving while Graham Ellis searched for a familiar face in the room. Callie, Ellis said. Callie came slowly forward, but he did not smile or raise his hand in greeting. He came as to a total stranger. Ellis pointed to the white boy by his side, a boy with eyes the color of indigo and dressed in awkward, heavy garments. Enoch Hopkins, Ellis said, and Willard Gibbs, he repeated. He repeated Gibbs's name twice to give it importance. His eyes traveled over the silent room, seeking Cinque and the man, Tua, the sick one, who spoke what might be Arabic. Not seeing them, he turned to Mr. Pendleton, the marshal and jailkeeper, and asked a question. Cinque, the jailer showed surprise. He's a dangerous murderer. I've got him downstairs in solitary, but I'll bring him up if you'll take the responsibility. I don't know about any sick man. This is all there is in these 2 rooms, except the little girls. My wife is fitting them with some decent dresses. I'll fetch him in when she's clothed them proper. The man unlocked a connecting door and disclosed another room full of captives. Then he went away, barring the door behind him. While he waited, Graham Ellis moved from one silent group to another. Mr. Pendleton had said that none were missing except Cinque and some girls, yet he did not find the sick man who had spoken words in Arabic. The door opened once more, and Marga, Fernie, and Temes slipped in, robed from neck to ankle in stiff calico wrappers. They looked unhappy in the ugly garments. They did not leave the doorway. No one spoke. Outside the closed door, the clinking of chains, the grating of a lock, the creaking of a door sounded strangely loud in the silence. The door opened and Cinque stood erect on the threshold. With cries of joy, the captives crowded around him. Cinque was still alive. He was with them again. Cinque caught sight of Graham Ellis. He moved toward him as to an old friend, hand upraised, eyes calm and confident. Callie sighed in relief. He had been wrong to doubt these men and this boy. They came in friendship. He caught Enoch's eye and smiled. Again, Ellis spoke the names of Willard Gibbs and Enoch Hopkins. Then he spoke Tua's name questioningly. At mention of Tua's name, there was a vague, troubled stir in the room. The 3 girls who had been hovering close to Cinque slid down at his feet and dropped their heads. We wanted to see Tua, Ellis explained, because he gave a greeting which sounded like Salam Alaikum. These are words of a language Professor Gibbs can speak. Gibbs thought maybe he could talk with Tua, could help you. As Ellis spoke, Cinque's eyes traveled to the anxious faces of his companions. He saw that they were frightened and sad at every mention of Tua's name. He knew then that Tua had died. Professor Gibbs nudged Ellis. I'm afraid we are too late to speak to the man you seek. From the look on their faces, he is evidently no longer living. Must have died in New London, then, the jailer said. These, you see, were all that were handed over to my keeping, and a scared bunch they are, all but that one charged with murder. Professor Gibbs, Enoch Hopkins said, isn't there any way to speak to them? You know so many languages. Willard Gibbs sighed. Arabic seemed a real hope, he answered, but I don't know a single African tongue, and if I did, it wouldn't be likely to be the right one. Every tribe in Africa speaks its own language. But some of the Negroes in town, wouldn't some of them be able to speak? The free Negroes in New Haven speak the language of the country they were born in, same as you and I, Gibbs answered. Since the days of the Declaration of Independence, there hasn't been an African slave brought to Connecticut. But you're right, that's what we've got to have. A native-born African of the same tribe as these people, and one who speaks English, too. However could we do that? Ellis asked. If we had some clue to their language, we might look for seamen of their tribe on British ships. We could go down to the waterfront in Boston, or better still, New York. It's our only chance, and it'll take a miracle to turn up such a man." As the three white men whispered together, Cinque saw a cloud cross the face of Graham Ellis. He guessed the problem, the old problem of language. There was Antonio, of course, but after the first thought, Cinque put that name from his mind. Once the masters were in power, Antonio had showed his true colors, caring nothing for truth. "What did you expect?" he had taunted when the chains were fastened to Cinque's wrists again. And to every lie Montes and Reese had told the soldiers, the cabin boy had nodded in monkey-like agreement. Though Antonio spoke enough of the Mandingo tongue, he would not be of use to them. Callie was watching the white men, too. Suddenly, he saw Graham Ellis beckon him. The man called Gibbs held up a finger and said a word in his own language, but Callie shook his head. He could not understand. Gibbs held up a second finger. What does he want to say? Callie could have wept with anxiety to understand. A third finger was raised. 3 fingers were held before his face. 3 words, one after the other, were spoken in the white man's language. Suddenly, Callie had a thought. He too held up one finger. He spoke one word, one in Mandingo. A second finger, followed by the word two. "By George!" Graham Ellis shouted. "The boy's got the notion. Write down the sounds, Professor Gibbs. I'll do the finger work up to 10.